We have some breaking news on a developing story out of the South China Sea as a U.S. Navy helicopter and a fighter jet have crashed in separate incidents.
We have some breaking news.
At 3:40 local time, a Chinese Type 055 guided missile cruiser running without navigation lights in the Philippine Sea completed a slow turn to bearing 350 and steadied on course. 112 vertical launch cells sat loaded in the dark. On the bridge, nobody said anything. There was nothing left to say. 320 nautical miles to the northeast, USS Ronald Reagan, a 100,000-ton Nimitz-class nuclear aircraft carrier, was conducting routine flight operations. The air wing had been cycling aircraft for 6 hours. The flight deck smelled like jet exhaust and hydraulic fluid. Nobody on that flight deck had any reason to think the night was about to change. The SM-6, the RAM-174 Standard Extended Range Active Missile, the most capable surface-to-air weapon in the United States Navy surface fleet, costs $4,270,000 per round. The Type 055 Runhai-class cruiser carries 112 vertical launch cells. If the crew of that ship decided tonight was the night, the opening salvo alone would represent a purchase order that most countries couldn't match in a year of defense spending. That was the part of the equation that tended to get lost in the press releases. The Type 055 is not a destroyer by any conventional definition. Its American designation calls it a cruiser, and even that undersells it. At 590 feet long and displacing between 12,000 and 13,000 tons at full load, it is larger than every American Ticonderoga-class cruiser still in service. Its Type 346B Dragon Eye radar, a quad-faced active electronically scanned array, a system that tracks satellites in low Earth orbit as a secondary function, had already been building a picture of the Ronald Reagan strike group for 3 hours. Every ship in the formation, every emission, every radar handshake between the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft orbiting at 24,000 feet and the 6 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers screening the carrier below. The American military calls it a destroyer. The Type 055 crew would accept that. The E-2DSAN APY-9 radar, one of the most capable airborne surveillance systems ever built, detects targets out to 350 nautical miles. On a clear night over open ocean, with a full picture of everything moving in the Philippine Sea, the crew of that Hawkeye was watching a lot of water and a lot of contacts and nothing that qualified as an imminent threat. What they didn't know was that it had already started. 40 minutes earlier, in the darkness south-southwest of the carrier's position, the Type 055 had opened 4 of its forward launch cells. What came out was not a YJ-18A anti-ship cruise missile, which is what the American defense community had spent a decade planning for. The YJ-18A is a weapon that cruises at Mach 0.8, just under the speed of sound, then lights a solid rocket booster in the terminal phase and accelerates to Mach 3, roughly 2,300 miles per hour, for the final 40 kilometers. It sea skims. It maneuvers. American surface ships have been running drills against it for years. They know its radar cross-section. They know its altitude profile. They know, roughly, how many SM-6 they need to fire at it. What came out of those 4 cells was something else entirely. The YJ-21, Eagle Strike 21, is an anti-ship ballistic missile launched from a surface warship. Not a cruise missile. Not a sea skimmer. A ballistic weapon. It climbs out of the atmosphere, arcs through near space, and then comes down at somewhere between Mach 6 and Mach 10, between 4,600 and 7,700 miles per hour, on a depressed terminal trajectory specifically engineered to minimize the time it spends inside the engagement envelope of anything the United States currently fields. Its range exceeds 540 nautical miles. From the position the Type 055 was holding tonight, that radius covered every ship in the Ronald Reagan strike group with room to spare. The SM-6 flies at Mach 3.5. The YJ-21 arrives at Mach 10. You cannot make those two numbers work in your favor with a standard intercept geometry. The SM-6 is America's only currently deployed surface-to-air missile with any theoretical capability against a hypersonic weapon, but only under specific geometric conditions, only in the terminal phase, and only when radar detection happens far enough out to build a fire control solution before the window closes. Against a target doing Mach 10 from 50 nautical miles out, that window is measured in seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. The doctrine writers called it challenging. Theoretical is doing a lot of work in that sentence. 370 miles to the northwest, at Kadena Air Base on Okinawa, the closest American air base to Taiwan, approximately 320 nautical miles from the strait, a pair of EA-18G Growlers were already turning their engines. The Growler is a purpose-built electronic attack aircraft. Top speed Mach 1.8, roughly 1,190 miles per hour. Combat radius exceeding 500 nautical miles. Armed with the next-generation jammer midband system, which replaced the old ANVALQ-99 tactical jamming pod and can reach into an enemy's radar architecture from a position outside the engagement range of the surface-to-air missiles defending it. The Growler doesn't shoot down missiles. It makes missiles miss by blinding the systems that guide them. The two crews had a threat picture. They had a general track on the Type 055. What they did not have, as they rolled down Kadeena's runway at 0347 local time, was any indication that 4 weapons were already 35 minutes into their flight. 80 nautical miles north of the Type 055, a Chinese Type 071 amphibious transport dock had been holding a slow racetrack pattern for 2 hours at 8 knots. A ship with no tactical reason to be in that piece of ocean under normal circumstances. In August 2024, imagery released by Chinese state media showed what appeared to be a turret-mounted directed energy weapon installed on a Type 071 that had come out of a maintenance period. Western analysts noted it. They called it a counter-drone system. They called it a defensive measure. They moved on. That framing was correct. It was also incomplete. The weapon, a high-power laser of undisclosed wattage, had been illuminating an MQ-4C Triton maritime surveillance drone for 22 minutes. The MQ-4C Triton is a high-altitude, long-endurance unmanned aircraft that operates above 50,000 feet for up to 30 hours at a time, surveilling up to 4 million square nautical miles in a single mission. One had been watching the Type 055's patrol box for 6 hours. Its electro-optical sensors were providing near-continuous imagery. Its data link was feeding that picture directly to the E2D crew and, through the Cooperative Engagement Capability Network, the real-time sensor integration architecture that allows every ship in an Aegis-equipped battle group to shoot from another ship's radar data to every destroyer in the formation. The laser didn't destroy the Triton. It didn't need to. The beam found the drone's optical sensor array and held on it for 90 seconds. The cameras registered a complete whiteout. The intelligence feed from the Type 055's patrol box went dark. Quietly. Without an alarm that read, "This is not a malfunction." For the next 6 minutes, nobody watching a screen in the Philippine Sea had any sensor coverage of the water where 4 YJ-21s had already been in flight for 41 minutes. 300 nautical miles to the northwest, on the bridge of the guided missile destroyer USS Decatur, the combat systems officer was watching the air picture when the first return appeared. Not a cruise missile track. Something else. Steep descent angle. Terminal velocity. The ballistic missile defense indicator activated and the AN-VESPY-6 radar, the Flight 3 Arleigh Burke's active electronically scanned array, the most sensitive shipboard radar the United States has ever put to sea, began building a fire control quality track. The track had been visible for 11 seconds when the Aegis Baseline 10 combat system calculated the intercept solution and flagged it as marginal. Marginal meant possible. It also meant one attempt. 4 SM-6 missiles cleared their vertical launch cells in sequence, 3 seconds apart. Each one is 21 feet long and weighs 3,300 pounds at launch. Each one accelerates to Mach 3.5, 3.5 times the speed of sound, within seconds of clearing the cell. Each round, $4,270,000. 4 missiles. $17 million off the rail in 9 seconds, chasing 4 incoming weapons doing nearly 3 times that speed from a geometry the doctrine writers had spent 3 years arguing over. The Cooperative Engagement Capability Network lit across the formation simultaneously. USS Chancellorsville, the Ticonderoga-class cruiser positioned 14 nautical miles south of the carrier, added 4 more SM-6 shots using Decatur's own fire control solution. Another $17 million. The Nulka active missile decoys, rocket-propelled, hovering electronic warfare packages that broadcast a radar cross-section larger than the ship that launched them, specifically engineered to seduce incoming missiles away from their intended targets, fired from the carrier's fantail launchers. 3 rounds. 4 seconds. 8 SM-6 missiles. 3 Nulka decoys. 4 YJ-21s inbound. 2 of the YJ-21s accepted the Nulka signature. Their seekers broke lock on the carrier and walked sideways. Both impacted the water 1,200 meters off the carrier's port beam. The kinetic energy of a 3-ton object moving at Mach 8 at sea level produces a water column 400 feet high. You do not need a warhead for that to qualify as a problem. The third YJ-21 accepted the SM-6 intercept. Kinetic kill at 12,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. The debris field spread across 3 nautical miles of open water. The fourth missed the Nulka. The fourth missed the SM-6. The fourth was still inbound. At 0418 local time, the carrier's Mk-15 Phalanx close-in weapon systems, the 6-barreled 20mm Gatling cannons that are the final layer of defense between a ship and a weapon that made it through everything else, reached the edge of their effective engagement range. 1,625 yards. The Phalanx fires 4,500 rounds per minute of tungsten core kinetic ammunition at $46 a round. A 2-second burst costs roughly $7,000. The system's magazine holds exactly 1,550 rounds. That is 20 seconds of total continuous fire before it runs dry. Against 2 or 3 sequential threats, that is acceptable. Against a Mach 8 object at terminal, it is a coin flip dressed up as a weapon system. The Phalanx fired. The tungsten rounds caught the YJ-21 at 800 meters, shredded its control surfaces, and sent it tumbling end over end. It impacted the water 240 meters off the starboard bow. The shock wave shook the hull plates 4 nautical miles away. On the flight deck, a crew chief directing an F-35C to the number 2 catapult position looked at the water column off the bow, looked back at the aircraft, kept directing. There was still a mission to fly. The F-35C Lightning II is the only 5th-generation stealth strike fighter ever designed to operate from a carrier deck. Top speed Mach 1.6, just over 1,200 miles per hour. Combat radius exceeding 670 nautical miles on internal fuel. Its radar-absorbing airframe makes it essentially invisible to every fire control radar the Type 055 carries. At 0422 local time, 12 of them were in the launch cycle. Their mission was not retaliation. Their mission was to establish a 200 nautical mile air superiority envelope around the strike group before the next decision had to be made. The one about whether this was a probe or an opening move. 80 nautical miles to the south, the Type 055 had already turned southeast. It was not fleeing. It was transitioning. By the time the first F-35C reached combat altitude, the Type 055 had put itself outside practical carrier strike range. It held its course. It turned off nothing. It made no attempt to hide. The captain of that ship understood something about the evening's results that would take the other side hours to fully process. The Type 055 had fired 4 YJ-21s from 540 nautical miles. In response, the American strike group had expended 8 SM-6 missiles at $4,270,000 each, 3 Nulka decoys, the complete Phalanx magazine on one mount, and had triggered an emergency flight deck evolution that would require 6 hours to normalize. The Type 055 had spent 4 rounds out of 112 cells. It still had 108 left. It had not used a single YJ-18A cruise missile. It had not activated its HHQ-9B surface-to-air missile batteries, which carry a range of 260 kilometers at Mach 4. It had not coordinated a strike with the land-based DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile units, the so-called carrier killers, positioned along the Chinese coastline with a publicly stated range of 1,500 kilometers and a Mach 10 terminal re-entry speed. It had fired 4 weapons as a geometry test. A question put to the universe about whether the intercept math worked the way the simulation said it did. The answer was, 2 out of 4 reached near-miss range. Against a fully alert, pre-positioned strike group with complete situational awareness, an active cooperative engagement capability network, and no element of tactical surprise beyond a 6-minute ISR blackout caused by a laser mounted on an amphibious ship. That was not a victory for either side. That was a data point. Both sides now had it. 600 nautical miles to the north, the 2 EA-18G Growlers from Kadena had been holding their jamming orbit for 40 minutes. They had successfully degraded the Type 055's Type 346B radar coverage by an estimated 60% during the intercept phase. The fire control picture the Type 055 received during the SM-6 engagements was partially blind. This was real. This was consequential. It was also irrelevant to the YJ-21 already in the air. The YJ-21 uses inertial navigation for mid-course guidance and an active radar seeker for terminal homing. It does not depend on the launch platform's radar after it leaves the cell. Jamming the Type 055 search radar after the missile is already flying is the electronic warfare equivalent of locking the door after the window has been broken. They had started jamming 40 minutes after the launch. There is a version of this engagement where the geometry works cleanly, where the Triton feed stays live, where the E-2D builds a track on the YJ-21 at the outer edge of its detection range, where the SM-6 goes up with 90 seconds on the clock instead of 11, where all 4 intercepts succeed. That version exists in doctrine documents and simulation software and congressional testimony. That version requires China to not have spent the last 3 years reverse engineering exactly those conditions before the Type 055 left port. Somewhere in a research facility in Shandong province, the team that designed the YJ-21's terminal approach profile had specifically chosen a dive angle and final velocity calculated to compress the SM-6 engagement window to under 12 seconds. They had modeled the AN-VESPY-6 radar's detection geometry against a near-space ballistic trajectory. They had analyzed the Nulka decoy's radar signature emitter and concluded that the threshold for saturation, the number of simultaneous inbound tracks needed to guarantee at least 1 penetration, was 4. 4 was exactly how many the Type 055 fired. Not a coincidence. The most expensive operational laser weapon system in the United States Navy, the Helios, the high-energy laser with integrated optical dazzler and surveillance, a 60-kilowatt directed energy system installed on exactly one destroyer in the entire fleet, USS Preble, developed under a $150 million contract with Lockheed Martin, proven in at-sea testing to defeat small drones for roughly $1 in electricity per engagement, was positioned 280 nautical miles away from this engagement. The Helios will never intercept a YJ-21. A 60-kilowatt beam against a hypersonic weapon descending from near space at Mach 8 would need to hold on a maneuvering target through 20-plus nautical miles of atmosphere for multiple seconds to achieve structural damage. The physics do not cooperate. At that range, atmospheric absorption alone reduces the effective energy on target to something that would be more appropriately called a very expensive observation lamp. China's shipboard laser was on a Type 071, used to blind a surveillance drone. America's laser was on a single destroyer 280 nautical miles from the fight. Neither laser won or lost this engagement. Neither laser was ever going to. The headline, in the version of this story that never appeared in any newspaper, would have been about the laser. About China's secret directed energy weapon. About the revolution in naval warfare. That is a much easier story to tell. It has a good visual. It has a dramatic name. It feeds an algorithm that runs on clicks. The real story was 4 missiles from 540 nautical miles, and a cooperative engagement capability network that had 11 seconds to solve a geometry problem that the other side had been preparing for 3 years. The Triton returned to Andersen Air Force Base on Guam 14 hours later. Its optical sensor array was permanently degraded. Replacement timeline, classified. The Type 055 docked at its home port without damage 72 hours after the engagement. Ronald Reagan held its position and completed scheduled flight operations. The Phalanx magazine on Mount 51 was reloaded manually by the weapons handling team over the course of 3 hours and 20 minutes. The next night, the Type 055 was back in its patrol box. Same position. Running dark. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other video on the DF-26B, China's so-called Guam killer. Bye for now.